Hey guys, tonight we wriggle into a muddy field where a full-grown man is elbow deep in a sack of goose grease, and several dozen villagers are cheering wildly as someone in two tight hose chases a squealing pig around a hay-strewn arena. This isn't some bizarre fever dream, it's Saturday entertainment in a medieval town square. And yes, you're expected to join in. You're wearing linen, everything itches, you're not sure if the smell in the air is sheep or someone's ale-soaked tunic, and it's honestly a toss-up. But you're here for the fun in 1382. Fun looks very different from streaming Netflix in sweatpants. You probably won't survive this weekend. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first exposure to fun in the Middle Ages happens appropriately in a field that smells aggressively of manure. It's a market day in a small village, and the local lord, who's not exactly generous but does enjoy seeing peasants run into thingshaws, sponsored a pig chasing event. The rules are simple: catch the pig, keep the pig. One problem: the pig has been slathered in grease so thick it might as well be made of living butter. You, of course, can't resist. You roll up your sleeves, which does nothing, tighten your rope belt, which also does nothing, and dive in with 20 other villagers who seem far more prepared. Some bring nets. Some bring buckets. One has fashioned what suspiciously looks like a giant spoon. You try to tackle the pig but bounce off like it's coated in soap and regret. Pig chasing wasn't just chaotic spectacle, it was communal. Everyone laughed, everyone smelled, everyone left with a bruise or three. Historians still argue whether the pig's role was symbolic, maybe representing fortune, fertility, or just a good excuse to grab something squishy in public. And then there's the goose races. Oh, the goose races. Less slippery, more screamy. Imagine trying to convince a goose to run in a straight line while children bang pots and scream like banshees on the sidelines. It's not so much a race as it is psychological warfare in feathers. Winners might receive a jug of ale, a ribbon, or the enormous privilege of owning the goose itself, assuming it hasn't bitten you into submission first. One fringe theory even suggests some towns train their geese to respond to flute music. This sounds charming until you picture a goose jazzed up on flute solos in pure panic, charging directly at a friar. Yet again, fun. Both pig chasing and goose racing were part of what scholars call folk games activities that required little to no equipment, were open to all classes, except maybe the really fussy nobles, and often doubled as social glue. Weddings, pig chase, feasts, goose race, Tuesday, why not both? But it wasn't all disorganized chaos. Sometimes, these games had structured brackets, informal champions, and long-standing rivalries. Entire villages would remember who that one guy was who caught the pig in record time back in 76. 1276. And then there's the betting. Oh yes, they bet. You'd think being poor would limit that impulse, but somehow there were always a few coppers clinking between hands. You might bet your last apple, or worse, your spot in the communal ale rotation. And God help you if you lose both. Interestingly, some church officials loathe these games, calling them debauched, vulgar, and my favorite, a gateway to goat-related temptations. Others embrace the festivities, seeing them as a harmless way to let off steam. Historians still argue whether clerical opposition was about genuine morality or just not getting invited. You're probably wondering, were there any safety rules? Hard no. If you got trampled, scratched, bit, or emotionally scarred by a particularly aggressive duck, that was just part of the charm. And yes, people got minor injuries all the time. But remember, this was a world without liability waivers or warning signs. Everything was a try-at-your-own-risk experience, including soup. By the time the event wraps up, your arms are covered in mud and unidentifiable grease, your knees feel like medieval gravel, and someone's grandmother just beat you to the finish line holding a pig over her shoulder like a victory prize. She's probably 80, wearing 6 layers of wool, and definitely had a pint before the race. You walk away with nothing but a story and possibly a limp. And yet, as absurd as it all sounds, these communal games stitched medieval life together in a way few other things could. They were cheap, they were ridiculous, and they were one of the few things that let people laugh together in a time full of hard labor, superstition, and alarming dental situations. You'll wake up sore, yes, but you'll also wake up a little more bonded to your muddy, hilarious, weirdly competitive village. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be better at grease pig tackling next year. The pig grease has barely worn off your tunic when you're swept into the next celebration zone with long tables, dangerously unstable candles, and a noticeable smell of overcooked meat. Tonight, you're not chasing livestock, you're feasting. And the games? Well, they come between courses, sometimes during them, and once in the case of a roll swan from them. Welcome to the medieval banquet, where the wine flows, the meat stews, steam, and your seat might explode. Literally, you squeeze into a bench beside a man wearing a hat shaped like a fish, and a woman who introduces herself only as the Baroness of Mayonnaise. You quickly gather she's not noble, just drunk. And suddenly, a chorus of clapping begins. A servant lifts a heavy pastry lid from what you assume is a meat pie, only for 6 live sparrows to erupt into the hall. They flap madly. One lands in your cup. Another dive bombs the host. Everyone erupts in laughter. You sit frozen, unsure if this is part of dinner or if someone messed up wildly. It's both. This, by the way, is not a one-off incident. Feasts in the Middle Ages often doubled as chaotic stage shows. One infamous banquet in Burgundy featured a singing fish pie, where a mechanical bird popped out and warbled a tune. Historians still argue whether these automaton pies were truly widespread, or if they were the medieval equivalent of a very niche party trick. And it wasn't just birds. Some banquet dishes were theatrical, featuring entire roasted animals stitched together like a pig's head on a peacock's body. Why? Because it looked dramatic. Also, nothing says bon appetit like a chimera on your plate. But the real weirdness begins after the 4th round of ale. That's when the dares start. Not shouted across the room, but slipped quietly under trenchers, those flat bread plates everyone's been eating off of. You glance at your soggy bread and notice a tiny scrap of parchment. Kiss the host's ring, with your nose. The Baroness of Mayonnaise laughs so hard she nearly falls off the bench. You obey, because it's either that or get dunked in the wash tub later by the court fool. These dares, sometimes pre-written, sometimes improvised dare, part of the feast game tradition. They walk a fine line between goofy and grotesque. One knight is dared to cluck like a hen until someone throws him a turnip. Another is told to sit backwards for the remainder of the meal, which is especially awkward once dessert arrives and he can't reach the honey figs. There's a logic to this nonsense. Medieval society was built on hierarchy. One knew their place. But for a few hours at a feast, those lines blurred. Servants sang, nobles danced on tables. Someone juggled potatoes while reciting a bawdy version of the Lord's Prayer. It was expected, encouraged even. This feast inversion wasn't accidental. It echoed broader festivals like the Feast of Fools, where roles reversed and chaos reigned. Some scholars argue that by letting off steam in safe, silly ways, the rigid social structure actually reinforced itself. Others claim it was an early form of protest, theater mildly anarchic fun, to remind the lords they weren't that special. Historians still argue whether it kept the peace or just gave everyone indigestion. Meanwhile, you're watching a game of who can eat the leek without using hands. The answer is no one. It's too slimy. But that doesn't stop Sir Geoffrey from trying to inhale it nose first. It's unforgettable. Then come the riddle contests. Some elegant, some dirty, Some that make absolutely no sense unless you've lived your whole life around sheep in Latin. What runs but has no feet, sleeps but never dreams, and smells faintly of pickles? Your guess is the moat. The answer? A drunken monk. Riddle logic is medieval logic, which is to say, unpredictable and occasionally terrifying. As you wipe some sort of custard from your sleeve, possibly custard, possibly melted cheese, you realize something else. These aren't just games, they're cultural time capsules. Every dare, every joke, every dish stuffed with live birds reveals how the medieval mind blurred fun, fear, and food into one big chaotic stew. And don't forget the fools. The court jesters are here, of course, prancing around in bells and patchwork tunics, but some feasts invited guest fools random villagers with a reputation for weirdness to perform for coin and glory. They sing. They mime. One man does an impression of a vomiting dragon using only a flagon of cider and a fish carcass. It's horrifying. Everyone claps. Even kids get involved. There's a child-led prank involving stuffing someone's boots with porridge. You laugh until someone turns your own boots upside down and out plops a soggy onion. Touché. One curious note, sometimes these games turn serious. Records mention cases where feast dares led to duels, divorces, and even excommunications. In one account, a bishop dared a nobleman to confess a private sin out loud. The noble did. It was a bit too honest. He got thrown out mid-dessert. Fun. And yet, you're having a good time. You're slightly sticky, possibly tipsy, definitely questioning your earlier decision to eat the green sausages. But for now, laughter fills the hall. The fire crackles, and everyone baron or baker shares the same table, if not the same sense of hygiene. Tomorrow, someone might get whipped for stealing turnips. But tonight, you're all equal parts ridiculous. By now, you're growing accustomed to the strange rhythms of medieval merriment, sudden singing, surprise poultry, and spontaneous nose kissing. But tonight, you're dragged outdoors. The stars are out, the ground is damp, and someone's got a sack full of rocks and onions. You don't ask questions. That's lesson 1 in surviving medieval fun. Just go with it. You're at a village fair, but not the kind with bumper cars and candy floss. No, this fair features something more robust. Competitive shouting, pig wrestling, and a game the locals call hot cockles, which is neither hot nor related to clams. It's just slapping. A lot of it, you're told to kneel, eyes shut, hands behind your back. Someone slaps you hard. You're supposed to guess who did it. You guess wrong, you get slapped again. Honestly, it feels like an elaborate excuse for the townsfolk to vent their frustrations. And you might be right. Historians still argue whether these games were playful social glue or passive-aggressive beatdowns wrapped in tradition. And then comes the wrestling pig. You're handed a rope. The pig is oiled. So are you. This already feels unfair. Wrestling pigs was a legitimate village sportical part strategy, speed, and humiliation. The goal, catch the pig. Bonus points if you do it with flair. Lose and you may find yourself in the stocks. Win and you might get a turnip, a wooden spoon, a brief moment of local fame before slipping on pig fat and ruining your only tunic. But the crowd loves it. Cheering erupts. Someone starts playing the lute badly. It adds ambiance. And you realize something. Medieval recreation was rarely a passive thing. No cozy audience seats, no politely clapping from afar. If you're present, you participate. That's the whole point. Take the shouting contest, for example. These aren't debates. These are raw, guttural expressions of who can bellow louder and longer without blacking out. The rules vary from town to town, but usually involve outshouting your opponent while standing on barrels, tree stumps, or sometimes the back of a slow-moving donkey. Today's reigning champ is a woman with lungs like cathedral bells and the ability to scream through a mouthful of stew. Then there's the mock duels. 2 people, 2 oversized sticks. No real damage intended, just bludgeoning until someone falls over laughing or loses a hat. Occasionally, it escalates. Someone grabs a sheep. It becomes a joust on foot, with bleeding and bruises. You're starting to see the pattern. Most of these fun activities are equal parts painful and absurd. You're also starting to worry about your insurance coverage, which doesn't exist. Still, there's undeniable joy here. People laughing with their entire bodies, families shouting at uncles to stop headbutting the tavern wall, children playing catch the tanner, which involves chasing the local leather worker with sticks until he agrees to give them sweets. He's remarkably fast. A lesser-known delight is the game of Hoodman Blind. That's medieval for blind man's bluff. But here, the blindfold is an actual hood thick, itchy, and probably shared between every villager. You fumble in the dark, arms flailing, trying to catch someone. You finally grab a sleeve and hear laughter. You've accidentally caught a goat, it licks your hand and chews your sleeve. You let it win. But not all the fun is violent or chaotic. Some of it is plain weird. Take the hobby horse parade. A man in a ridiculous horse costume trots through the streets, flanked by dancers and drummers. He neighs, he bucks. At one point, he pretends to woo a milkmaid. People clap as if this is peak theater, and honestly, maybe it is. Hobby horse performances were part satire, part seasonal ritual, and part excuse for grown men to gallop around in wigs. Some versions included fertility symbols. Others had the horse dying and being resurrected. Historians still argue whether the whole thing was pagan, Christian, or just deeply silly. You suspect it's all three. Nearby, a man in a jester's outfit juggles eggs. He's terrible. One lands on your shoulder. You laugh. Because at this point, being egged feels like the least weird thing that's happened today. You wander into the game square, where people compete in all sorts of feats. Tug of war using wet ropes. Sack races on stilts. There's even a game where two people try to hit each other with inflated pig bladders while balancing on a log. It's a beautiful disaster. And then, storytelling. As the fire pits flicker, everyone gathers to listen. An old woman tells tales of knights with 7 toes, dragons who couldn't fly straight, and enchanted chickens that laid golden eggs, but only on Tuesdays. You listen, wrapped in a blanket that smells like onions and hay. It's perfect, because here's the truth. Fun in medieval times wasn't about perfection or polish. It was about absurdity, about sweat, bruises, laughter, and shared ridiculousness. In a world where winters were long, food was bland, and leeches were considered medicine, people took joy where they could find it. Sure, your shoes are full of mud, your tunic's been slapped, egged, and possibly blessed by a goat, but you've laughed more today than you have in a month. And just wait till tomorrow's cabbage hurling contest. Sleep has barely nudged your eyelids before dawn breaks and the village roosters, in true medieval fashion, scream at you like tiny feathered demons. You stretch, wince those pig wrestling bruises are no joke and shuffle out of your straw-stuffed cot. The air smells like smoke, dung, and slightly overbaked porridge. In other words, it smells like a medieval Tuesday. You're not up early by choice. No one is. But today's special. It's St. Drogo's feast day. Or is it St. Gwenefort? No one's quite sure. Someone lost a parchment calendar in a flood last month. So the village elders picked both. Why not double the fun? Your first event? Animal court. Yes, actual court. With animals. The town gathers at the green where a goose stands accused of theft. Someone's turnip went missing. A local friar acts as the judge. Children serve as bailiffs. The accused goose honks indignantly. A pig gives testimony. Well, it grunts near the crime scene. You sit on a log, trying not to laugh as a chicken is sworn in. Believe it or not, real records exist of medieval animal trials. Pigs were hanged, roosters burned at the stake, and goats occasionally acquitted with honor. Historians still argue whether these were symbolic rituals or just a community's way of bonding over collective absurdity. Next up, public spectacles. But this isn't punishment, this is sport. Today's special feature, climbing the greasy pole. A tall wooden post, slathered in pig fat, stands ominously in the middle of the square. At the top dangles a sack contents unknown, but rumored to include sweets, coins, or, according to one 8-year-old, a magical frog. You're invited to try. Your first attempt, you slide down so fast your shoes come off. Your second attempt is more graceful until your tunic betrays you and lifts in a way history will not forgive, but you almost make it. And that counts as legendary. Villagers cheer. Someone hands you a pickled radish in celebration. It's surprisingly crunchy. Later in the day, you find yourself roped into a dancing circle. The music is frantic pipes, fiddles, something that sounds suspiciously like someone whacking a barrel with a ladle. And the dance? Absolute chaos. It's called threading the needle, but there's no needle. Just wild twirling, stomping, and occasional shouting when people trip. Your hands are grabbed, you're spun. You lose one shoe, then the other. You embrace barefoot destiny. Dance wasn't always refined in medieval life. Sure, nobles had their steps and measured bows, but villagers, they danced with joy, sweat, and no sense of ankle safety. Dancing, in fact, was so essential to public fun that when it got out of hand like during the infamous dancing plagues towns, sometimes banned it altogether. Historians still argue whether those dance frenzies were caused by moldy rye, mass hysteria, or just too much time between cabbage harvests. Once you've sufficiently twirled yourself into a state of dizziness, you collapse beside a woman braiding wildflowers into a crown. She tells you about the May Game springtime festivals filled with symbolic fertility rites. One of them, finding the Green Man, a local dressed head to toe in leaves and vines. He emerges from the forest, gets fake captured by a group of children, and is paraded around while everyone throws petals and sings bawdy songs. You swear he winked at you from behind a tree. You do not follow the Green Man. You've learned your lesson about mysterious leafy figures. And what's that over there? Ah yes, the ultimate medieval test of skill and despair. Hood tug. Two participants wear hoods tied together by a rope and must crawl on hands and knees, trying to pull each other over a line drawn in chalk. It's equal parts tug of war and slow motion headbutt. You're signed up before you can protest. Your opponent is a child with terrifying focus. You win but barely end only because he pauses to sneeze. Not all fun here is about falling over or bleeding slightly. Sometimes it's games of wit. You're introduced to riddle rows, where villagers sit in a circle and challenge each other with riddles, many of which involve sheep, monks, or vegetables. The riddles aren't always clean though. They're phrased in ways that sound innocent until they're absolutely not. A favorite tonight? I have a stiff stalk and I go in a hole. What am I? Answer: a key. Obviously. What else? By now, night creeps in, and you're ushered toward the feast tent. For once, you're not required to chase anything, wrestle anyone, or climb a slicked up post. You're allowed to just sit, eat thick stew, drink weak ale, and watch a troupe of fire dancers perform their highly unregulated routine. And then comes the puppet show. Two crudely sewn characters representing virtue, the other vice bicker, fight, fall in love, die, come back, and accidentally marry the town, donkey puppet version. The audience roars with laughter, and so do you. It's all hilariously inappropriate, mildly moral, and completely captivating. As the fire embers crackle, an old man leans over to you and shares a legend that in one distant village, fun once involved riding barrels down muddy hills to see who could stay on the longest. No one ever did. One man lost his pants and became a local saint. The church disapproved, of course, and that, right there, might be the truest thread of medieval fun. Rebellion, wrapped in revelry. Games weren't just entertainment, they were escape. A way to poke fun at hierarchy, to mock the rules, to wrestle pigs and shout until your voice cracked. Life was short, unpredictable, and often absurd. So the fun had to be louder, messier, covered in mud and sausage grease. You feel it now, the giddy exhaustion, the ache in your thighs, the bit of grass in your hair. You're not just observing anymore, you're part of it. Congratulations, you survived another day. Just wait until tomorrow's onion juggling relay. The sky above your head is black velvet stitched with stars. You're curled up near the communal bonfire, still radiating the leftover energy of a day packed with medieval mischief. But don't get too comfortable. Just when you think you're safe from more absurdity, a man in a too short tunic and a massive feathered hat taps you on the shoulder and whispers, "Mummer's hour." You blink. What's a mummer? Before you can ask, you're dragged into a strange parade of costumed figuresome in animal masks, others in robes made of stitched together rags and vegetable peels. The one leading the procession has a cabbage crown, and what you sincerely hope is fake blood smeared across his cheeks. Mummer plays, as it turns out, are theatrical performances that mix seasonal celebration, religious satire, and improvised nonsense. They're loud, chaotic, and completely unlicensed. You're handed a mask made of bark and straw and shoved into the middle of a scene involving a knight, a dragon, and a pregnant nun. You have no lines, but you do get fake stabbed and dramatically collapse onto a hay bale. 10 points for performance. Mummers weren't just village clowns. These were political commentators with wooden swords. They parodied clergy, mocked lords, and poked at social tensions under the safe guise of fun. Historians still argue whether their plays were tolerated out of affection, fear, or because no one could stop them once the go-headed king started singing. After you survive your surprise stage debut, someone offers you a mug of festival wine. It tastes like regret and cloves. Perfect. But the fun isn't done. Tonight is the night of the silent hunt. Not silent as in peaceful, silent as in if you make a sound, you're out. A midnight game, equal parts hide and seek and psychological warfare. Players spread out across the village's darkened paths, each trying to tag others without being caught or making noise. You tiptoe around chicken coops and over fences, ducking behind barrels, breathing like a hunted squirrel. You're tagged by a 9-year-old wielding a ladle. She hisses, "Gotcha," and vanishes into the darkness like a mischievous sprite. Games like this didn't require money or boards or even daylight. They required creativity and, occasionally, an unhealthy amount of competitive spite. Remember, people didn't have TikTok or Netflix. They had ladles, sheep, and a terrifying amount of imagination. By dawn, you're nursing a bruised shin and an ego flattened by children half your size. Time for breakfast? Wrong. Time for another kind of fun. Mock trials. The townsfolk gather again, but this time not for animals. This time is human specifically. One unlucky guy accused of stealing the moon. He made a joke about the harvest being too dark. It's all play acting, of course, but the stakes feel oddly high. You're asked to be a witness. You give testimony about the moon's whereabouts. You point dramatically at a sheep. The crowd gasps. The judge, who is also the town's blacksmith, bangs a ladle against a bench. Verdict: guilty of lunar thievery. Sentence: tickled by feathers until he sings a local drinking song. Mock trials offered villagers a way to laugh at authority without actually challenging it. A parody court was often more satisfying than the real one and far cheaper. Historians still argue whether these trials were purely comic or a sneaky tool for community justice. As the trial wraps up, you're ushered toward what's advertised as the Tournament of Fools. And no, it's not exclusive to clumsy folks. It's a real event where jesters, pranksters, and certified idiots compete in absurd challenges. Today's lineup: who can shout the longest insult without repeating themselves? Who can wear the most hats while hopping on one foot? Who can recite a love poem to a loaf of bread? You're invited to judge. The poetry portion is emotional. One man proposes marriage to his sourdough. Another compares his baguette to Helen of Troy. You're deeply moved and possibly a little hungry. The Jester Games were actual medieval events, often part of Feast of Fools celebrations. They allowed society to momentarily flip itself upside down, where the lowest ranked person became king and the highest had to dance in a chicken suit. Okay, maybe not literally, but you get the vibe. And through all this, music never stops. Everywhere you go, someone is playing something: pipes, fiddles, flutes, even spoons. It's not always on key, and sometimes it's aggressively out of sync, but it's alive. You pass a group harmonizing over a joke song about a monk who lost his pants and a chicken who ran a bakery. The refrain sticks in your head. You sing it under your breath until a group of masked dancers suddenly bursts into the square. It's time for the morality jig. Yes, that's a real thing. The dancers wear costumes representing abstract concepts: greed, love, death, the plague, played with alarming enthusiasm by a toothless man in soot-stained robes. They chase each other in a symbolic game, flailing and pirouetting to tell the tale of life, sin, redemption, and really questionable choreography. You get pulled in to be gluttony. You're handed a pie and told to run in circles while laughing. You've never felt so typecast in your life. As the jig ends with a dramatic fake death and group collapse, you lie there breathless. There's flour on your face, someone's wig in your lap, and inexplicably a carrot in your boot. And you realize something. Medieval fun isn't passive. It demands your participation. It throws you into roles, paints your face, spins you in a circle, and shouts, "Dance!" Whether it's theater, trial, or chasing a goat with bells tied to his tail, the joy is in the doing, in the noise, in the chaos. You sit up, brushing off crumbs. Somewhere nearby, someone shouts, "Prepare the jellyfish hats." You don't even ask. You follow. You tie on the jellyfish hat. Don't ask what that means, you're in too deep now. It's crafted from dyed linen, stitched with strands of raffia, and topped with what looks like the handle of a broken parasol. When the wind hits it just right, it flaps with a life of its own. Welcome to the Festival of Odd Hats. This isn't just fashion, it's fierce competition. Medieval towns, especially in places like Flanders and northern Italy, loved throwing hat contests during feast days. The point? To outdo your neighbors in creativity and absurdity. One guy has attached a small chicken coop to a skull cap. Another wears a replica windmill. You even see someone balancing a live goose not recommended. You're entered into the wobbliest headgear category. It's a tight race, but you secure second place, losing only to a merchant who somehow balanced a cabbage and a lantern without blinking. But don't take that hat off yet, because next up is the backwards parade. Yes, you walk backwards, in silence, while balancing household objects on your shoulders. Why? Because it's believed to confuse evil spirits. Or maybe it's just hilarious. You join the line of villagers, all trudging backward past the mayor's house, past the grain silo, past a guy playing a lute while riding a backwards-facing mule. You step on a child's foot. She forgives you with a dramatic bow. Someone trips and starts a domino chain of flailing. It's a mess. It's glorious. These absurd rituals weren't just for laughs. They served as social glue, bonding people through shared silliness. Historians still argue whether this kind of humor masked deeper resistance to religious or feudal authority, or if humans just really enjoy falling over while wearing cheese hats. At the end of the parade, you're rewarded with a slice of something sweet, honey spice root pie. It tastes like dessert and cough syrup, had a baby, but you're too hungry to complain. Then comes the weirdest event of all, the invisible tournament. You are told nothing. The rules are not explained. You are simply handed a wooden spoon, blindfolded, spun around 3 times, and pointed toward a field. What follows is half tag, half interpretive dance, and 100% mayhem. People are shouting nonsense, waving flags at trees, and awarding themselves imaginary points. You get tackled by someone calling themselves the Duke of Gravel. You retaliate by declaring a spontaneous alliance with a one-eyed pig farmer and a nun holding a broom like a scepter. Nobody wins. Everyone wins. The invisible tournament is over. You collapse in the grass, wheezing from laughter and possibly a cracked rib. A boy in tights pours water over your head and tells you the next match starts tomorrow. You nod solemnly and vow revenge. Or lunch. Speaking of meals, there's no tavern crawl tonight. Tonight, it's feast games. These are dinner parties cranked to 11. You're ushered into a long hall where bread trenches serve as plates, and every dish has a riddle attached. The roast boar arrives wearing sunglasses made of olives and is introduced as Sir Gruntington of Hampshire. You must address it with a haiku before eating. You try. "Oh, noble pork beast, why do you gaze into night? Because you're tasty." Applause. Feast games were a beloved part of noble and peasant celebrations alike. They included things like Guess the Stew, where spices were swapped to confuse diners, or Who can eat the most without using hands? Yes, that's real. Yes, you try. No, you do not win. A monk with a surprisingly flexible neck takes that title. During the feast, a man in a tunic covered in moss stands to deliver the Complaint of the Turnip. It's a dramatic poem about a vegetable who wishes to be loved for more than just soup. People weep. You do too. Possibly from indigestion. After dinner, things turn musical again, sort of. Welcome to the singing duel. The rules? Improvise an insult ballad about your opponent without breaking rhythm. You're matched against a shepherd named Aldwin, who immediately sings, "Your hat's like a bucket, your face like a sock. You smell like my donkey, come stand on this rock." You respond with, "O Aldwin, sweet shepherd, your sheep run in fear. Not from wolves, dear Cerbert, your rear draws the sneer." The crowd erupts. You may have made an enemy, but you've earned respect. Singing duels were a fixture in Nordic and Celtic regions but bled into mainland Europe over time. They let people air grievances without fistfights. Usually, historians still argue whether some of these duels were scripted performances or actual feuds settled with rhythm and rhyme. Either way, your opponent shakes your hand then challenges you to a burping contest. You respectfully decline. You step outside for some air, head spinning from music and spice and ale and riddle meat. You think it's over. It isn't. Suddenly, you're caught in a laughter chain. What's that? A line of villagers standing shoulder to shoulder, trying to make each other laugh with faces, noises, or ridiculous one. Liners. If you laugh, you join the chain. You hold firm until an old woman with a single tooth does an uncanny impression of a squawking duck having an existential crisis. You break. You laugh so hard your legs give out. You join the line. These communal moments, full of goofiness and surprise, were powerful tools of stress relief. In a world of plague, famine, and war, laughter wasn't a luxury. It was medicine. Poor man's Prozac, if you will. As the stars reappear and laughter fades into a soft hum, you realize something deep. Fun in the Middle Ages wasn't passive consumption, it was creative production. It was participatory, chaotic, and very, very sticky. You were the audience and the actor, the jester and the fool, the pie and the punchline. And now, someone's yelling about a sneezing choir. You sigh, stretch, and follow the sound. Because why stop now? You shuffle toward the sound of sneezing, not in horror, not in alarm, but in deep, resigned curiosity. The sneezing choir is already assembling beneath a garland-draped arch made of willow branches and questionable ambition. A man in a fur-trimmed robe and a beetroot-stained chin waves a ladle like a conductor's baton. He clears his throat. Ready your nostrils. Someone begins grinding pepper into the air. The first sneeze erupts from a lanky teenager and echoes like a trumpet blast. Then another and another. In chaotic succession, until you've got a full-scale medieval symphony of nasal explosions. No one's sure what the score is. Some claim is to imitate battle trumpets, others swear is to ward off plague demons. Historians still argue whether this was a form of mock ritual or just a particularly spirited way to pass the time in February. Either way, you're handed a pinch of pepper. You try to hold out, you fail. Your sneeze ricochets off a nearby wooden post and earns applause. A peasant bows dramatically and tells you, "That was a very moving D-flat." The absurdity continues with something even less sanitary: the leaping pudding race. Imagine this: boiled sacks of flour and raisins tied up like cannonballs, laid across a field. The contestants must hop over them while wearing heavy woolen robes. It's part relay, part interpretive dance, part orthopedic hazard. You join a team of grocers who call themselves the Mince Mavens. You almost trip on the first pudding, recover mid-air, and land like a triumphant goat. Someone rings a bell. Someone else plays the bagpipes badly. You don't care. You win a jar of pickled radishes and a kiss on the cheek from an elderly woman named Berta. She doesn't ask. She just does it. Later that night, as your thighs begin to cramp from all the hopping, you're pulled toward the flickering glow of torches and the unmistakable sound of fake courtroom arguments. Yes, welcome to mock trials. Tonight's accused, a wheelbarrow, charged with conspiring against gravity. The judge is wearing a cabbage on his head and insists on being called your turnipship. Witnesses come forward to testify with completely fabricated stories. You take the stand to claim the wheelbarrow once insulted your cow. Laughter ripples through the crowd. Mock trials weren't just a novelty. They offered a safe way to satirize authority, poke fun at daily grievances, or just give everyone a chance to pretend they were clever lawyers. Think of them as part improv theater, part emotional release valve. Historians still argue whether these events were strictly comedic or if they harbored genuine critiques of feudal law and power. You personally think it's Bob Specially when the accused wheelbarrow is sentenced to 30 lashes with a leak. It's dragged away with full solemnity. From there, things take a surprisingly spiritual turn. You're invited to a mystery play performed by candlelight in the churchyard. Unlike earlier chaos, this is structured, rehearsed, almost reverent. It's a biblical story, sure, but there's comedy slipped between the verses. Noah's sons wear oversized animal masks. The devil trips over his own tail. The audience laughs, gasps, even cries. Medieval mystery plays were one of the rare ways everyday folks got access to storytelling, religion, and performance all in one. Actors were often bakers, butchers, or shepherds by trade. It was their moment to shine, to embody something bigger than the village pig shortage. Tonight's play ends with a surprisingly convincing angel doing a cartwheel. Applause erupts. You toss a coin. It's caught midair by a kid playing a sheep. After the play, the audience disperses to a nearby clearing for what's been ominously described as the game of questions. Everyone sits in a circle. You're not allowed to say anything that isn't a question. The moment you slice in just a maybe, you're out. The prize? A turnip carved into a surprisingly detailed owl. The game begins. Where did you hide the herring? Why do you assume I did? Isn't it always you? Couldn't it be the dog? You last 6 rounds before blurting, probably. Disqualified. Turnip owl slips through your fingers. Still, the laughter that follows feels like balm on sunburned skin. You curl up on the grass with a few others and watch as shooting stars skitter across the night sky like spilled diamonds. As you yawn, thinking surely this is the final act, a small, wiry boy taps you on the shoulder. "Come on," he whispers. "You haven't seen the Lantern Labyrinth yet." You blink. What now? He leads you, barefoot, toward a dense grove of willow and hazel. Flickering lanterns dangle from branches, illuminating a winding maze made of hay bales. hanging bed sheets, and ropes strung with bells. You must find your way out by answering riddles at checkpoints. One wrong answer, and you're sent back to the start. First riddle: what walks on four legs in the morning? You interrupt, it's a man. Wrong. This version ends with a badger. You groan and start again. The labyrinth is disorienting, scented with wood smoke and beeswax. Somewhere in the distance, someone giggles like a goblin. Others recite sonnets to confuse you. One guy pretends to be a tree. You're not sure he's acting. It's a test of patience, logic, and endurance, and strangely, it's calming. Historians still argue whether lantern labyrinths had roots in pagan rites or were invented purely to annoy exhausted villagers. Whatever their origin, they offered a dreamy, strange end to long, raucous festival days. You finally find the exit, duck under a sheet curtain, and fall into a pile of hay. Lanterns sway above you like tired fireflies. Your legs ache, your cheeks hurt from smiling, and you think maybe the Middle Ages weren't all plague and pitchforks. Maybe, just maybe, they knew how to squeeze joy from every corner of existence. Even if that joy came with pepper sneezes and pudding-related bruises. You stretch out your sore legs, flexing muscles you didn't know you had, and before you can say, no more weirdness, please, you're roped literally into the barrel spin. This isn't just a game. It's a test of bravery, balance, and your ability to avoid vomiting on your tunic. The setup is medievally simple. A large barrel laid on its side with one very enthusiastic man spinning it like his life depends on it. Participants climb inside, attempt to stand and stay upright for as long as possible. You step in, knees wobbling, and immediately realize this is less game and more rotational torture. You last 9 seconds. Applause. Someone hands you a stale biscuit. You're not sure if it's a prize or a punishment. Still dizzy, you stumble into the next event insult duels. Ah, yes. The noble art of medieval verbal sparring. No swords, just words, though the jabs can cut pretty deep. You're paired against a woman named Agnes, who smiles sweetly, then immediately calls your haircut a goat's mistake. You gasp. You retaliate with, at least I don't smell like last year's cabbage stew. It's not your best, but it earns a few chuckles. Agnes claps. Oh, we have a spicy one. Insult duels weren't just for laughs. In some towns, they were actual entertainment, staged in marketplaces or during festivals. Think of them as roast battles with fewer microphones and more turnips. Historians still argue whether these were rooted in ancient traditions of honor challenges or just good old-fashioned human pettiness institutionalized. You lean toward the latter, especially when one man gets booed for recycling an insult from 3 rounds ago. Medieval plagiarism? Scandalous. After the war of words comes something quieter but no less strange. The apple bobbing gauntlet. Unlike modern versions, this isn't just dunking your face in water. This is a full obstacle course blindfolded, of course where you're guided only by the sound of apples being dropped into buckets at random. You crawl, you bump into hay bales. A goat nibbles your sleeve. Somewhere, a child yells, "Warrior of the orchard," and cheers you on. You finally reach the target bucket, dunk your face in, and emerge victorious with a prize. A single raisin and the dubious honor of being Sir Applechomp the Moist. You don't love the nickname. Then comes Goose Roulette. You sit in a circle. A man walks around with a goose under his arm. If the goose honks at you, you're it, and must chase the goose-carrying man in a game of high-stakes tag. No one really knows the rules. The goose definitely doesn't. Your turn comes. The goose stares into your soul, then honks. You run, dodging hay bales and chickens, until you finally tag the manly to find out you're now the next goose carrier. It's a game that makes no sense, and that's exactly why everyone loves it. Historians still argue whether Goose Roulette had ceremonial origins, or if it was just chaotic farmyard comedy. The goose, notably, refuses to comment. From there, you're lured into something equal parts eerie and delightful. The Midnight Howling Choir. It begins when the clock strikes 12. Participants often mass gather at the edge of the forest and begin howling, barking, or mimicking any wild animal of their choosing. It's part performance, part group catharsis. You pick owl, you regret it when someone else does a better owl and throws you shade. The tradition supposedly started as a mock ritual to scare away evil spirits. Others say it was just an excuse for teenagers to make noise past curfew. Either way, it's oddly freeing to let out a wolfish yelp and have someone yell, "Nice timber." You cackle, you howl, you feel like a lunatic. It's wonderful. From there, things get even weirder. You're invited to the snail race arena. This isn't metaphorical. Actual snails with names, decorated shells. A crowd gathers, placing wagers on Snalius Maximus, Sir Slimington, and a newcomer named Greg. You're handed a small banner for Team Greg. The race begins. The tension is unbearable. People chant. Someone faints. A bard plays an unnecessarily dramatic lute solo. Greg wins by a millimeter. You scream. You hug a stranger. You win a slightly squashed meat pie. Victory never tasted so mediocre. The sheer creativity of these diversions starts to dawn on you. In a world with no Netflix, no smartphones, no escape beyond the physical village, Borders people made fun from nothing. And often, that nothing involved livestock and risk of splinters. But it's not all absurdity. There's also the song relay, a gentler, melodic game that has participants sing lines of a folk tune, adding, altering, and improvising as it goes. It's cozy, communal, and you get to sit for once. You listen as a baker sings a verse about a squirrel who hoards cheese. A shepherd follows with a line about a jealous cow. You chime in with something about a dancing boot, and somehow it fits. This was how oral culture thrived. Stories, jokes, and folklore passed mouth to mouth like secret recipes. And unlike many pastimes, it required no props, just imagination and lungs. Historians still argue whether the melodies themselves were standardized or completely improvised. You lean toward chaos, especially when someone ends the song with a loud raspberry and everyone claps like it's Shakespeare. Finally, you're led to what may be the strangest game yet, the silent stare duel. Two participants sit face to face. No blinking, no smirking. First to flinch loses. You sit across from a child with terrifying eye contact skills. You think you've got this, you don't. He blinks at you slowly, deliberately, like a cat sizing up a mouse. You break. He nods solemnly. You're defeated. He's 6. That's when you realize even in these outlandish medieval games, there's a quiet thread of community, of connection, of inventiveness, humming beneath it all. You wander off into the night, head spinning with images of howling villagers, racing snails, and cabbage-wearing judges. Fun, in medieval times, may have been strange, but it was never half-hearted. And maybe, just maybe, neither are you. Your cheeks are still flushed from the silent stare duel, part humiliation, part secondhand joy when a loud clang interrupts your introspection. Someone's banging a pot with a wooden spoon, calling villagers to gather for a new attraction, the cheese roll chase. Yes, you heard that right. A round of hard cheese is placed at the top of a grassy hill, and brave, or foolhardy contestants hurl themselves downhill after it. First one to reach it wins the honor of keeping said cheese and, more importantly, bragging rights for the rest of the festival. You're nudged forward, you politely decline, they shove you anyway. Before you can rethink your life choices, the cheese is launched. You run, well, tumble. The ground blurs, gravity becomes your least favorite cousin, and you roll more than you sprint. Grass in your mouth, twigs in your hair, you crash into a haystack and emerge victorious adjacent. The actual winner is an elderly woman named Maud, who cartwheeled the entire way. She hoists the cheese like a gladiator's trophy. Historians still argue whether these events were symbolic of seasonal change rituals or simply a medieval excuse to watch people fall for fun. Either way, you are now bested by a woman with no cartilage in her knees. Let that sink in. Dragging yourself back uphill, with far more effort than going down, you're stopped by a group dressed in mismatched animal costumes. No, not for some early medieval masquerade. You've just stumbled into the chaos of beast jousting. The rules are beautifully unclear. Players dress as animals badger, fox, goose, even a slightly disgruntled donkey, and try to joust one another with padded sticks while balancing on barrels. Your role? Judge, or so they say, but 2 minutes in, someone tosses you a foxtail and insists you represent Team Volpes. Fine, you're in. You climb your barrel, waver, and engage in what can only be described as violent pillow fighting in fursuits. One participant roars like a lion, another honks like a dying goose. You jab, wobble, then fall dramatically. The crowd cheers your spirit, if not your coordination. Fun fact, some scholars think games like this stem from pagan fertility rites or mock trials of local animals blamed for crop failure. Others say it was just an excuse to wrestle in public without getting fined. You prefer the second theory. Less responsibility, more giggles. Bruised but happy, you limp toward the sounds of clinking metal and rhythmic drumming. Ah, the Pot Helm Arena. This one's especially ridiculous. Contestants wear large inverted cooking pots on their heads, eyes barely peeking through haphazardly cut holes. They're handed wooden spoons, spun in a circle 10 times, and then told to find a bell in the center of a small arena using only sound. First to ring it wins. Second place, dizziness and emotional damage. You try, you fail. You bang into 3 barrels, 1 child, and finally collapse beside the bell. The winner rings triumphantly, only to realize the bell has come off its stand and is now stuck on their head. A champion and a chime, someone jokes. You snort, laugh. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic penance play or merely the medieval answer to carnival whack-a-mole. One thing's clear, it's a hit, both literally and figuratively. Then, just as you're thinking it can't get more surreal, a hush falls over the field. People step aside as 2 costume giants enter, their outfits exaggerated with straw padding and papier-mâché heads. The puppet duel is about to begin. In this time-honored sport, 2 villagers chosen for size, stature, or comedic timing dress as oversized noble champions and stage a mock combat with exaggerated moves, absurd drama, and a complete disregard for reality. You watch as one fake knights the other mid-battle and then collapses from honor overload. Turns out, these duels were often scripted ahead of time and included town gossip, satire of authority figures, and the occasional improv fart joke. They were the medieval version of sketch comedy, performed in town squares and harvest festivals alike. You marvel as the crowd belly laughs at a duel ending in both giants falling over in love. Somehow, a chicken ends up perched on one's back. You're not sure if it's part of the show, but no one minds. Then, just when you think it's time to go find a bench and reevaluate your spinal health, you're tugged into a quieter circle where people are sitting with eyes closed. Welcome to dream telling. Here, the game is sharing the most bizarre dream you've had in the last week, which is then analyzed with questionable logic. You describe a nightmare where a goat gave you legal advice. The village dreamseer gasps. A sign of wisdom unspoken, she declares, and possibly indigestion. She gives you a mint leaf, while dream interpretation stretches back to ancient cultures, including Babylon and Egypt. Medieval folk twisted it into both play and prophecy. Historians still argue whether these gatherings held genuine spiritual weight or were just opportunities to air suppressed thoughts in a safe, semi-mystical space. You just think it's a great excuse to be weird in public. As you stand, a hush falls again, a bell tolls. No, not the pop bell, this is more serious. The villagers gather for the final event of the day, Mummer's Judgment. Part costume parade, part mock trial, part improv skit gone rogue. This court features absurd charges: stealing the moon, hoarding dreams, wearing two left shoes, equally absurd defenses, and a crowd that votes by yelling. You're assigned the role of moon thief. You deny all charges. The judge accuses you of lunar mischief anyway. Your defense? The moon told me it needed a vacation. The crowd erupts. You are declared guilty but charming. Your sentence: wear a crown of turnips until sunrise. The Mummer's Judgment reflects the medieval need to invert power structures, if only for an hour. It was a pressure valvia place to laugh at lords, mock rules, and let the powerless feel powerful. Historians still argue how much sway these events actually had on social cohesion. You only care that you now have vegetable headwear and adoring fans. As twilight deepens, the crowd begins to thin. Children yawn, chickens are rounded up, and one man attempts to remove a goose from his belt like it's a sword. You sit by a fire, turnip crown askew, and reflect. These weren't just games. They were acts of defiance against boredom. Wild, ridiculous, messy declarations that life was meant to be played with, not just endured. Even the cheese rolls and pot hymns had heart behind them. And tomorrow, there'll be cabbage joust, morning breaks with a rooster shriek, and the vague feeling that your spine is now shaped like the barrel you slept against. Your turnip crown has mysteriously vanished, possibly eaten by a goatan. The fires burned low, crackling gently in the misty dawn, but no time to mourn your ruddy regalia. A small boy tugs at your sleeve and whispers the most sacred phrase of all. They're about to start the cabbage joust. You follow him with the dazed reverence of a pilgrim approaching a shrine. The cabbage joust is, in theory, self-explanatory. Two participants mount wooden hobby horses strapped between their legs, each armed with a leafy cabbage on a stick. The goal: knock the other cabbage out of their opponent's grip without falling over. First to 3 hits wins, or, alternatively, last one standing with some dignity intact. You're not a player this time. You're the cabbage caddy. Your job is to hand refills to your team's rider. Your team's rider is named Oswin. He's 73, he's wearing chainmail made entirely of bottle caps. He's also undefeated. Oswin's secret? A sneaky lunge and a face so determined it could turn butter back into milk. The joust begins and leaves fly like confetti. The crowd roars with each crunchy hit. Your arms get sore from cabbage distribution, but it's worth it. Oswin wins again. He bows so low his fake horse slips off. Historians still argue whether games like this had symbolic roots, perhaps a harvest tradition, or a fertility metaphor that's mercifully vague. Others insist it was just another way for bored villagers to weaponize salad. Honestly, you believe both. After the joust, you wander into the heart of the fairgrounds, where a new game is setting up, Guess the Saint. It's part trivia, part charades, and part pantomime gone rogue. One player acts out the life of a saint using props like feathers, fish, or flaming torches. The audience has to guess the identity. Someone flaps their arms, drops to their knees, then pretends to get beheaded. Someone else shouts, "Saint Denis!" and they're correct. The prize? A dried fig and bragging rights. You're up next. You attempt to portray St. Lawrence roasting slowly while allegedly telling his captors, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." You lay on your back, mime sizzling, and yell, "I'm toasty." Everyone immediately guesses correctly. You're given a fig and a friendly slap on the back. The fact: saints' lives were well known in the Middle Ages and often used in plays and parables. The fringe detail: some saints, like Lawrence, were so over the top they became icons of gallows humor. And yes, historians still argue whether some of those famous quotes were real or added later for dramatic flair. You personally suspect ancient PR agents were involved. You wander on and spot a curious contraption, a spinning platform, some blindfolds, and a basket of eggs. Welcome to Egg Balance Roulette. Each player stands on the spinning platform with a spoon and tries to balance an egg while blindfolded. The last one standing without a cracked yolk wins. Naturally, you volunteer. Because nothing says medieval leisure like accidental concussion by egg. The game begins, the platform rotates slowly, and you do terribly. Within seconds, your egg launches into the crowd like a miniature comet. It splats on a noblewoman's sleeve. She laughs. All is forgiven. Mostly, the winner, a small girl named Bruna, is so steady you wonder if she's part statue. They give her a wreath of rosemary and a boiled egg as her prize. She looks thrilled, or maybe just very into herbs. You pause near a shaded tent next, where villagers are whispering about the truth game. This one is trickier. It's a circle game where people take turns asking personal, awkward, or downright bizarre questions. You have to answer truthfully, or sing a verse of a bawdy song while balancing a spoon on your nose. A man asks you, "Have you ever fallen in love with a chicken?" You say no. He nods like that was the correct answer, but you're not sure if he believes you. You ask someone else, "What would you name your sword if you had one?" She says, "Peony." The crowd swoons. These little question games weren't just silly, they acted like social release valves. In a society governed by strict norms, this was a place where truth and absurdity danced around each other. Historians still argue whether these were remnants of courtly rituals or village mischief nights, but clearly both flavors survived. After several rounds and a frankly concerning rendition of The Farmer's Naughty Turnip, you sneak out before the spoon, singing resumes. Then you hear it, a trumpet. A trumpet followed by a goat bleating in tune. That means only one thing, the Fool's Relay. A team race involving egg carrying, pig escaping, hat snatching, and blindfolded partner trust walking. It's half obstacle course, half relationship stress test. You get paired with a miller's apprentice named Rollo, whose arms are stronger than your will to live and whose strategy is run fast and hope. You carry the egg, he wears the blindfold, you scream directions, he screams louder. The pig escapes again, someone cries. At one point, you both end up in a barrel. You're not sure how, but the crowd is loving it. Laughter ripples like a storm surge, and you realize that this madness is the point. The prizes are forgettable. The game mechanics are questionable. But the memory? Solid gold. When the race ends, and you don't win, a quiet event begins. The silence contest, an actual medieval favorite. Participants sit in a circle and try not to laugh, speak, or flinch while jesters parade around doing the most ridiculous things imaginable. You take your seat, lips pressed together. A jester enters with a chicken on his head and begins reciting bad poetry in a mock French accent. Someone cracks. Another jester performs the silent scream routine, miming being eaten by an invisible wolf. You're holding strong until he pulls out a tiny lute and starts serenading your knee. You break hard. The winner? A stone-faced nun who may actually be asleep. It's said that medieval silence contests were used in monastic training, but also co-opted by villagers as a parody of their silent neighbors. Historians still argue whether the laughter was a form of defiance or just laughter. Either way, you lost, and it felt great. With the sun sinking low and the air smelling of hay, onion pie, and victory, you realize you've laughed more in one day than you do in most months back home. And you've still got one fig left. You're still savoring that last fig when someone pulls you toward a wooden platform surrounded by draped tapestries and the faint, suspicious smell of wine gone wrong. Time for mystic marionettes, they say, and you wonder if your fig contains something herbal. Turns out, it's puppet theater night. The puppets are roughly carved, vaguely humanoid, and animated by strings pulled from above by village masters of shadow. The stories, not children's tales, but full-on satire. Lords being turned into frogs for ignoring taxes, nuns sneaking wine into confession, and dragons falling in love with donkeys. It's like watching a Shakespearean fever dream, only more wooden. One particularly dramatic scene ends with the puppet king being eaten by his own chair. The audience howls. You think you spot the local reeve quietly taking notes, as either offended or planning his own rebuttal performance. Fun fact, puppet shows in the Middle Ages weren't just for kids. They were vehicles for satire, storytelling, and social commentary. They mocked the powerful and entertained the bored. Historians still argue whether some plays were tolerated as community catharsis or used to quietly push against authority. You'd argue the donkey love story deserves an encore. After the show, a small procession begins, scandals in jars, bells on ankles, and participants humming an oddly calming tune. It's time for the snail watch. Yes, you heard that right. Snails. The villagers place several large snails on a long board coated in honey and breadcrumbs. Then they watch. The first snail to reach the other end is declared the chosen. This has no clear purpose. It is mesmerizing. You crouch with the crowd, whispering encouragement to your favorite, whom you name Jeffrey. He is slow, so slow, but noble. He does not win, but he does finish. Eventually, there is polite clapping and someone gives him a lettuce leaf. Fringe theory time. Some scholars believe games like this were spiritual metaphors for patience or divine providence. Others believe villagers were just deeply bored, or possibly drunk. Speaking of which, you're handed a mug of what tastes like wine, but punches like regret. A festival tonic, they call it. You call it medieval mouthfire. Either way, it helps soften the blow of the next game, the whack fair. It's essentially a version of modern carnival games. A ring toss using severed goosenecks, don't ask. A hit the bullseye contest with pig bladders filled with flour, and a game where you have to catch apples dropped from a balcony using only your hat. You do not win any of these. You do, however, win a consolation prize. A small wooden charm shaped like a hedgehog. The merchant tells you is for emotional defense. You accept solemnly. A sudden drumbeat interrupts your hedgehog reverie. A group of dancers in elaborate cloth masks begin twirling around a central maypole. Each wears a banner with a riddle written across it, and as they spin, you try to read the riddles and solve them before they stop. This is the riddle dance, and it's wildly competitive. One riddle reads, "Without voice I teach, without limbs I travel. What am I?" You shout a book and win a rose petal tucked inside a walnut shell. Don't ask why, it feels momentous. Riddle dancing was used, according to some accounts, to teach children lessons and test suitors' wit. Others argue it was a carryover from ancient Greek symposia filtered through local tradition. Whatever its origin, it's delightfully chaotic. After the dancing, a more solemn moment settles over the square. The mask of mirth. A large carved mask is passed hand to hand, and each person has to hold it up and say something joyful, ridiculous, or heartfelt through it, almost like it channels humor or truth. One man pretends to be his wife's chicken and clucks a love poem. A girl announces her dream to become a professional acrobat for ducks. A young boy just screams "Onions!" and runs. You're handed the mask. You pause, then whisper, "I once fell in love with a cabbage at midsummer." Everyone applauds. One man wipes away a tear. Historians still argue whether such traditions were spiritual ceremonies disguised as fun, or just the opposite, fun disguised as spirituality. Either way, the mask carries a strange weight, like you've confessed to something older than the village itself. The night draws cooler now, and you follow torchlight to a ring of villagers sitting cross-legged around a storyteller. No costumes, no props, just words. It's the tale swap. You listen as one woman tells of a knight who fell in love with a ghost and married her shadow. Another shares a tale of a baker who cursed every customer with hiccups unless they thanked him in rhyme. When it's your turn, you recount Jeffrey the snail's noble journey. It gets a standing ovation. Jeffrey, presumably, is still recovering somewhere in the grass. Story circles like this were the heart of community bonding in medieval villages. They weren't just entertainment, they were how news, lessons, humor, and family lore survived. Historians still debate how much of these tales were original versus recycled from older traditions, but it doesn't matter when the firelight flickers and everyone is listening. Just when you think the night has peaked, someone yells, "Final round," and villagers line up for the goose waddle contest. It is what it sounds like. You are given a hooded cloak and told to mimic a goose's walk as convincingly as possible across a marked line. You see dignity fly from your body like feathers in the wind. You honk, you flap, you waddle. You nearly trip. You win third place, mostly for commitment. Your prize is a feather crown and a small loaf of fig bread. You are now a fig-laden, crown-wearing, cabbage-failing goose impersonator, and you've never felt more alive. As the crowd disperses, people start laying down near the coals of burned-out fires. Some curl up under makeshift tents. Others just lean against each other. No one rushes home. Why would they? You lie down too, staring at the stars. You wonder how many of these strange little joys survived history's edit button. How many were lost or turned into polished rituals in textbooks? And how many people, long before you, waddled like a goose and felt the thrill of being seen and silly in a world that rarely allowed it? The stars don't answer, but they twinkle a little more kindly tonight. You wake up with a piece of fig bread still tucked under your arm, a feather slightly askew on your makeshift crown, and just enough chill in the air to remind you you're still in medieval times and somehow not dead from laughter or that mystery tonic. Before you can wipe the drool from your chin, the morning bell clangs and someone shouts, "Boar bashing in 10 minutes." You're not sure what that means, but your instincts say run or watch from a safe distance. You choose the latter. Boar bashing isn't actual hunting, at least not today. It's a theatrical, somewhat absurd game where a mock boar, played by a volunteer in a fur tunic and terrifying papier-mâché head, charges a ring of villagers. The goal? Smack it with padded sticks while trying not to fall over from laughing. The boar wins if it can knock over 3 people without getting tagged. You watch as the boar, a wiry man named Auriclid, out a growl so earnest it scares a chicken into flight. 3 kids wielding sticks charge at him, only to be scattered like medieval bowling pins. Auric does a victory lap, the crowd erupts, you cheer, mostly because it's impossible not to. Games like this serve many roles: releasing tension, channeling aggression, or if you believe certain scholars, secret training for self-defense. Historians still argue whether these mock battles reflected real societal concerns or were just good old-fashioned chaos. You're voting chaos. Just as you're recovering from the boar-induced giggles, a woman in a green kerchief waves you over. "You look like someone who needs to judge a sausage duel," she says with a grin. She's not wrong. A long wooden board is laid out, and contestants each place a sausage on it. The twist? These sausages aren't eaten, they're raced with spoons. You're given a polished wooden spoon and asked to tap your chosen sausage down the board without breaking it or letting it fall off. There's betting involved, lots of it. You pick a suspiciously pink one and name it Sir Meat-a-Lot. The race begins. You tap gently, your opponent jabs too hard, and his sausage flies into the dirt with an audible plop. Sir Meat-a-Lot takes a graceful roll and coasts to victory. The crowd lifts you onto their shoulders. You are now sausage champion, and the title comes with a crown of dried thyme and a small jug of the good cider. You decline the cider. Once bitten, twice burned. As you wobble back to solid ground, you're ushered toward a different kind of game, the penance parade. Don't worry is not as grim as it sounds. Participants take turns walking a narrow path lined with spectators who shout mildly insulting phrases at them, all in good fun. You're supposed to act contrite, over-the-top apologetic, or dramatically ashamed. Bonus points for creative groveling. You go full Oscar mode. You crawl, you weep, you shout, "Forgive me for stealing the last turnip," and collapse into a pile of straw. The crowd loses it. These parody penance rituals were popular in local festivals, allowing people to poke fun at the authority of church and court without actually committing heresy. Historians still debate how far the satire could go before someone in real robes got offended, but on days like today, boundaries blur. Suddenly, someone blows a ram's horn and yells, "Bring out the giggle stones!" You are, understandably, intrigued and mildly alarmed. Turns out, giggle stones are flat, palm-sized pebbles painted with ridiculous faces, some frowning, some gurning, some with wild googly eyes. The game is simple. Pick a stone and keep a straight face while someone else recites increasingly ridiculous compliments to it. Stone, you are more beautiful than a fresh turnip on market day. Stone, your eyes could tame a leper's donkey. Stone, I would trade my last shoe for a moment in your pebbly embrace. If you crack a smile, you lose. You do not last long. Honestly, the donkey compliment gets you. You wheeze into your sleeve. There's no prize for this one, just communal laughter. Still, the simplicity of it charms you. And there's a lesson here maybe, that joy doesn't always need to be complicated. Sometimes it's just a face drawn on a rock and a really good turnip metaphor. You barely have time to breathe before the town crier declares 1 hour of courtly ridicules. Participants don old cloaks, fake crowns, and declare themselves monarchs of nonsense. The objective? Issue royal decrees as ridiculous as possible. By my authority, I declare all socks must be named Harold, shouts one. Henceforth, no one shall speak on Wednesdays unless they hum between syllables, yells another. You're declared a duke, and decree, every third child shall be raised by hedgehogs until the age of 7. A hush, then applause. Then someone hands you a stuffed hedgehog doll in solemn agreement. Mock courts like these were part of Feast of Fools traditions in some regions. They temporarily reversed hierarchies, allowing peasants to impersonate clergy or kings. Historians still argue whether this offered genuine critique of power or was a sanctioned form of letting off steam. Either way, you're now Hedgehog Duke, and that's not nothing. As the day winds down, a group begins preparing the pie parade. No, not for eating, for judging. You're handed a clipboard. A clipboard! And told to assign points to pies based on smell, wobble, and how poetically they're described by the baker. One man describes his turnip pie as a longing in dough form. A woman calls hers the flavor of spring's regret. One pie smells like victory, another smells like socks. You rank them, and the sock pie wins. Because why not? And just when you think it can't get weirder, they roll out the final act, the laughter duel. 2 villagers face each other. Each has to try and make the other laugh using only a feather and facial expressions. They're silent, intense, and occasionally ridiculous cross-eyed stares, exaggerated eyebrow waggles, and that one guy who somehow folds his ears. You try it, you lose immediately. The feather tickled. Games like these, simple and absurd, filled long evenings before candles burned out. They weren't just diversions, they were social glue. Tools of survival in a time when joy had to be crafted from hay, humor, and a good hedgehog reference. The sun dips. Fires are lit again. People settle into clusters, clutching pies, cider, laughter still trembling in their bellies. You stretch out once more on a borrowed blanket and exhale. It's been a full day in medieval nonsense. And you didn't just survive. You played, you laughed, you crowned a sausage. You're sprawled in the afterglow of laughter, and honestly, you kind of feel like you've run a marathon if that marathon involved sausage duels, giggle stones, and a brief stint as Duke of Hedgehogs. But before you can drift off into your well-earned pie dream, the bell clangs again. Not the shrill fire or famine bell. This one's softer, slower, rhythmic. A hush settles. You're about to witness something rare. The night revels. These aren't your typical bonfire dances or tavern songs. No, night revels are something of a medieval talent show mixed with a masquerade and a spiritual seance, but with more fart jokes. Everyone wears a mask, everyone adopts a persona, and the rules are be weird, be loud, and be fun. You're handed a mask shaped like a goose's face. You have questions. No one answers. Goose face in place, you follow the procession into the woodsy-esque woods. 100 lanterns swing in trees like glowing pears, casting golden shadows over the forest floor. Beneath one ancient oak, a makeshift stage has been cleared. It's not fancy, just a few boards and a log bench, but it might as well be the Globe Theater in this light. A man in a cat mask steps up. He recites a limerick about a nun who loved cheese too much and ends with an exaggerated curtsy. Laughter erupts. A child in a fish mask performs interpretive dancing that mostly involves spinning until dizzy. A woman in a jester mask sings an ode to her missing tooth. The refrain, "Oh molar, my molar, you left me too soon." You sit, enraptured, as more acts unfold, some heartfelt, others chaotic, and at least one that seems to be entirely performed in goose honks. You clap for all of them, even the honks. Night revelry like this, especially in rural villages, was a release valve, a chance for expression that didn't fit into strict workdays or rigid church expectations. Historians still argue whether these revels were truly subversive or just sanctioned silliness. Some say they bordered on pagan, others think they were folk therapy with a comedic twist. Your turn comes. Someone shoves you forward. The crowd chants, "Goose face, goose face, goose face." And here you are, standing under flickering lanterns, faced with an expectant audience in potato sack tunics and fish heads. You do what anyone would do. You flap your arms, you wobble, you make 3 long, confident honks. Then you deliver a dramatic poem titled "Ode to a Sausage I Once Knew." It's terrible. It's brilliant. The crowd gives a standing ovation. After your act, you're offered a seat of honor, a mossy log with the least ants on it. You're now revel goose of the night, and someone hands you a garland of onion skins tied together. It smells ambitious. Then comes the mock battle of the revel lords. Each reveler is assigned a title: Baron of Breadcrumbs, Lady of Lost Socks, Count Fumblepants, and must defend their honor in a series of nonsense duels. No actual weapons, just dramatic declarations. You, as Gooseface Duke, must face the Countess of Crumbs in a duel of metaphors. You shout, "Your honor is as empty as a turnip's diary." She retorts, "At least I don't bathe with geese for insight." It's unclear who wins. Probably the crowd. And that's the point. Nobody loses in the night revels. It's a celebration of being weird, wild, and gloriously untalented. This was fun with no purpose, no prize, no hierarchy, just shared absurdity under the stars. Eventually, the final act takes the stage. An old woman with a voice like cracked parchment. She sings a ballad in a language you don't recognize. The melody is haunting, oddly sad. And just like that, the energy softens. The crowd leans in. Even the guy in the fish mask stops spinning. Turns out, the night revels always end with a quiet song, passed down through generations. No one remembers its origin. Historians still argue whether it's a pre-Christian lullaby, a mourning tune, or a coded protest chant. But right now, it just feels right. The song finishes. No applause. Just a moment of stillness. Then, one by one, people begin placing their masks at the base of the oak. A tiny ritual. You do the same, leaving Gooseface to watch over the forest until next time. You walk back in silence, the stars blinking their approval. It's past midnight now. Your legs ache, your cheeks hurt from smiling, and you smell like 5 kinds of pie. Just when you think the day is over, someone nudges you. Fancy a midnight fool's wager? You're handed a stick, a rock, and an egg. The rules are unclear. Something about balancing the egg while hopping on one foot and quoting a saint. You try, you fail, you drop the egg. The rock wins. You laugh again, because of course it does. Games like this, strange and unscripted, weren't written about in royal chronicles or scribe scrolls. They lived in the laughter of peasants, the silliness of strangers, and the sacred nonsense shared under torchlight. You finally collapse onto straw in a quiet barn corner, wrapped in someone's discarded cloak that smells faintly of onions and bravery. The sounds of revelry fade into cricket chirps and soft snores. You think back to every game, every absurd competition, every time you shouted something ridiculous and were met not with judgment but with joy. This wasn't just fun. This was freedom. In the middle of the most rigid, plague-addled, church-dominated centuries of Europe, somehow humans still found a way to giggle, to challenge power through fart plays, to raise sausages, to crown a goose. And now, it's your turn to rest. The first light of dawn paints the thatched rooftops in quiet gold, and you stir from your straw-filled cocoon like a half-baked pastry. Your neck hurts, your dreams were a blur of juggling monks and musical cabbages, and your face is still sticky from pie filling. Somehow, it's perfect. You stretch your legs and shuffle toward the village square drawn by the faint sound of drums, bells, and the kind of laughter that only comes from people doing something extremely stupid on purpose. And you are not disappointed. It's time for one of the strangest, most chaotic, medieval fun customs, mock trials, specifically animal trials. Yes, they're putting a goat on trial today for public indecency. His name is Bernard. You squint at the makeshift courtroom cart with a chair on top, draped in someone's curtains. A self-appointed judge in a flour-dusted wig of sheep wool takes his seat. A rooster crows. The crowd roars with anticipation. You learn that Bernard the goat allegedly knocked over the town butter stand and stared far too long at a peasant's ankles. These are serious accusations. The bailiff, a child with a ladle and a tomato, reads the charges aloud. The goat, chewing slowly on a bootlace, is clearly unrepentant. The defense attorney, a local fool with a turnip necklace, launches into a passionate argument about Bernard's right to express himself as a sentient being with taste in dairy and ankles. Is it indecency, he cries, or simply art? This may sound utterly insanient. Yes, it is, but medieval mock trials weren't always random. Some were satirical takes on real court procedures, especially during carnival or fools festivals. Others were quasi-legal and absolutely involved real animals. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuine beliefs or elaborate theater. One 15th century pig was tried and executed for murder. Another, a rooster, was burned for laying an egg witchcraft, obviously. But today's goat, he's just here for the drama. Bernard is found guilty. The sentence? Public tickling. Children surround him with feathers and giggles. Bernard bleats once, indifferently. You almost can't breathe from laughing. But the fun doesn't stop at goat justice. The next event is a full-on backward court session where everything is inverted. The poorest villager is crowned king for an hour. He declares pudding mandatory and bans all turnips. The mayor is forced to sweep the square while wearing his wife's apron. The priest has to recite tongue twisters in Latin. Badly. This inversion of roles where power is mocked and peasants' regness part of a deeper tradition. Medieval society was strictly hierarchical, but once in a while, festivals let the powerless poke fun at their lords. Some scholars argue it served as a harmless pressure release. Others say it was a rebellious parody of the feudal order itself. Either way, it's hilarious watching a monk pretend to be a swan while nobles clap like children. Next up, the Wheel of Dares. It's literally a wheel painted in crude colors, spun by the most suspiciously enthusiastic old woman you've ever seen. Dares include things like speak only in rhymes for an hour, kiss the nearest chicken, and impersonate death doing laundry. You spin, it lands on flirt outrageously with a vegetable. You choose a carrot, you name it Reginald. You compliment its posture and promise to write poetry about its orange soul. The crowd erupts. Someone throws a leak in support. Eventually, you find yourself drawn toward a quieter space, the edge of the market, where a small circle has formed around a blindfolded harpist. People toss topics at her snail pride, jealousy of cheese, and she composes silly songs on the spot. You suggest The Secret Life of Mops. She sings, they dream of castles and capes of suds. They battle grime in noble floods. Their bristles worn, their spirits high. Each sweep a whispered lullaby. You tear up a little, it's weirdly beautiful. And that's when the final challenge is announced. The trial of the Fool's Crown. You're nominated. Apparently, every festival must end with one grand ritual. The crowning of the supreme fool, the one who made the most people laugh, caused the least actual damage, and showed unrelenting enthusiasm for utter nonsense. You don't feel worthy, but they shove you forward anyway. To win, you must complete 3 tasks. Ride a wheelbarrow while reciting the alphabet backward. Perform an interpretive dance about the weather using only spoons. Impress a chicken. You do your best. The wheelbarrow wobbles wildly, but you only mess up 1 letter. The dance is more chaos than choreography, but the spoons glint dramatically. And the chicken? It looks at you, tilts its head, and clucks twice, which, according to the judge, is a passing grade. They cheer. They chant your name well, your new name, Sir Giglinoggin. You're crowned with a flower pot filled with jelly beans, declared the official Fool King of the day. Your duties? Smile, wave, and eat the jelly beans with solemnity. You do so. The beans are weirdly spicy. The sun dips low as the crowd sings an old nonsense song with made-up words. It loops for ages, no one minds. You hold your flower pot crown and sway in time. At some point, someone pulls you aside and whispers, "You know this all started as a fertility festival, right?" You blink, they wink. That's why the goat was symbolic. Of course it was. Because in the Middle Ages, joy wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. Against plague, famine, and fire, laughter was a weapon. Absurdity was rebellion. A tickled goat was proof that life could still be fun. As the music fades and torches are lit, you sit quietly on a hay bale, still wearing your jelly bean crown, and think, this has been one of the strangest, most wonderful days you've ever not actually lived, and you do it all again tomorrow. The torchlight flickers across your face as you linger at the edge of the festival's aftermath. The hay is trampled, the food is mostly gone, save for some mystery pie, and laughter still hangs in the air like smoke from a well-earned fire. You shift your flower pot crown and feel the slight sting of jelly bean sugar on your forehead, an oddly fitting sensation to carry you into the final stretch of this bizarre, medieval carnival of fun. But hold on to your socks, because we haven't yet talked about one of the most shockingly strange and slightly terrifying forms of medieval entertainment, trial by ordeal as performance. Yeah, you heard that right. While ordeals were technically legal tools used to determine guilt or innocence, in certain villages, people treated them like events, spectacles, rituals with popcorn-level anticipation. You gather with the crowd in a clearing beside the chapel ruins, where a monk with suspiciously good stage presence sets the scene. A suspect is brought forth. It's all pretend tonight, but the energy is real, and the ordeal is chosen, carrying a red-hot iron bar for a few paces. Now, obviously, no one's burning their hands tonight. This is a reenactment blend of real medieval anxiety and community catharsis. The hot iron is just cleverly painted wood. The crowd gasps anyway. You realize, weirdly, that this is both a morality play and an audience participation thriller. Who knew the Inquisition could have such great pacing? Historians still argue whether these kinds of dramatized ordeals helped reinforce justice or just terrify people into submission. Some believe they served to remind communities of divine judgment. Others suspect they were half faith, half fear, and all pageantry. A whisper reaches your ear. Next up is the ordeal of the dunking stool. You turn to see a giggling young woman perched on the edge of a suspended barrel seat, balancing precariously above a muddy trough. She's accused of being overly smug about her embroidery. Her defense? I'm just really good at cross-stitch. The crowd votes with jeers and applause, and she's dunked with dramatic flair. Sputtering and laughing, she emerges from the water, triumphant and soaked. She bows. The crowd roars. Somewhere, someone starts singing about St. Agnes and her magical yarn. And it strikes you again that fun in the Middle Ages wasn't always what we'd expect. Sure, they had feasts and tournaments and church bells ringing across the valleys, but the true fun, the kind that stuck, it was the communal stuff. The messy, improvised, homemade, slightly dangerous chaos that glued people together, like mock funerals for bad weather. Or that time you stumbled upon a group of villagers throwing a ceremonial funeral for winter. They parade a straw effigy of Jack Frost through the square, chant nonsense Latin, and toss him into a bonfire to ensure spring comes faster. Was it superstition? Was it performance art? Was it just an excuse to drink cider and wear leafy crowns? Historians still argue about that too. You stop keeping track. Even more absurd? The medieval obsession with talking animals, not just in fables, but in actual plays. In one village, you witness a reenacted morality tale where a goose teaches a sinful baker about humility. The goose wears a bonnet and speaks through a hidden puppeteer. The baker weeps. The audience claps. You blink rapidly. You catch yourself thinking, this is weirder than the goat trial. And yet, also weirdly wholesome. As dusk begins to collapse fully into night, the final celebration begins. The Feast of All Fools. A kind of ultimate variety show where everyone gets to be a performer, if only for a moment. You watch a knight do a dramatic reading of a love letter he wrote to his favorite cheese. A nun beatboxes. A child juggles eggs and drops all of them. No one minds. Applause rains down like blessings. The Fool King, technically, is asked to give a farewell speech. You stand on a barrel, raise a mug, and say something that feels right. Today we dance with absurdity. Tomorrow we face mud, taxes, and toothaches. But tonight we laughed, and that's how we win. They cheer. You step down and quietly return your flower pot crown to the village's honorary hat shelf. The wind picks up, brushing hay across your boots. Someone hands you a leftover pie. You don't ask what flavor this time, and you wander to the edge of the firelight, full of sugar, stories, and joy. As you sit in the grass, watching sparks rise to meet the stars, the true magic of medieval fun clicks into place. It wasn't just distraction. It wasn't just survival. It was ritualized silliness, sacred nonsense, purposeful joy in a world that often forgot to smile. And as your eyelids droop and your breath slows, you realize that maybe, just maybe, absurdity is the most ancient, noble kind of wisdom. The fire's warmth fades into a soft memory, and you find yourself lying back on the cool earth, the scent of wood smoke curling into your dreams. The night sky above is vast and velvet dark, punctuated by a scatter of stars that look close enough to pluck. Your limbs are heavy in the best way, like you've danced for hours and laughed too hard to stand. Somewhere nearby, a fiddle hums its final note, and a gentle breeze rustles the trees with the hush of bedtime secrets. The goat bleats once. You smile. In this world of cartwheeling friars and cabbage crowns, there's a strange peace, a reminder that joy has always been more than just noise. It's a quiet defiance. A whispered yes in the face of every plague, every famine, every cold winter night. So now, let yourself drift. No more pies to dodge, no more chickens to impress. Just the slow rhythm of your breath, the faint hum of a harp played badly in the distance, and the comforting weight of your flowerpot crown resting beside you. Let your mind wander one last time through juggling monks, ticklish goats, and musical turnips. Let it all fade into softness, into stillness, into sleep. You've earned it, Fool King. You really have